Thank you, Colleen. Good afternoon, good day, everybody, and welcome to our discussion today on QlikSense security rules. I'm going to start off before the discussion with the legal disclaimer. Okay. So I want to start off, before we get into security rules, just talking about QlikSense for a moment. QlikSense is our next generation of visual analytics product. It is a self-service visualization platform that really enables users to not only click through and investigate and make discoveries in data, but also to begin to build stories using visualizations that they can drag and drop into an intuitive interface using dimensions and measures that are built into a library that allows them to create their own discovery visually as well as being able to click through. When we talk about what QlikSense enables you to do, we're taking our patented data indexing technology that we've used in QlikSense for many, many years, and we've put it into QlikSense, which enables us to deliver deliver self-service visualization and discovery like we talked about earlier. And what this means is it gives you that intuitive exploration, smart search capabilities throughout the data model that's loaded into memory, smart visualizations that resize to the different device that you're on. We're using HTML5 and CSS3 to render the visualization layer of QlikSense that gives you responsive design. And you have this user-driven drag-and-drop approach to analytics and discovery where you can go ahead and just pull data into a table. You can bring bar charts out onto a canvas and then drop dimensions and measures right into them and get an immediate feedback in terms of what you're trying to look at. We also have powerful collaboration capabilities within QlikSense for sharing knowledge and insights. One of those methods is through the use of stories. Stories help take information in your discoveries and give you a presentation view to share with others, whether that's in an interactive meeting or it's a report that you want to provide users and have them access through the QlikSense Hub. And you really have, it promotes this mobile experience so that you can access the product from any device at any time. In addition, because we're using our patented associative data indexing technology and because of the security rules we're going to talk about in a few minutes, we've got the ability to create broad adoption and organizational intelligence across the enterprise. We basically have given you the ability to customize the rules that allow users to see what they're supposed to see, have access to different parts of QlikSense, be able to perform different levels of self-service within QlikSense, and we're going to go through that today. You also get robust data integration, extensibility, and if you were part of our earlier webinars this week, you saw some webinars on APIs as well as building QlikSense from scratch. Data integration, being able to bring data in from multiple sources simultaneously, as well as governance using the master library of dimensions and measures to help provide users with a self-service platform that is easy for them to go ahead and take advantage of. Today's focus is on QlikSense security rules. And I'm going to start off with an outline of the QlikSense security rule framework. We'll talk about how and what methodology we're using, what it means for QlikSense, and how we've implemented it in QlikSense. We'll review a flow of and the roles managed by Qlik security rules in QlikSense. So we'll talk about different use cases where security rules may come in handy. And then we're actually going to go into the management console. We're going to take a look at a couple of security rules that I've created in advance. We'll walk through them a little bit, and then we'll actually apply them and see in real time the impact of those security rules and what they enable a user to do. And then after that, we'll take some questions. Okay. So the key thing about Qlik Sense security rules is they are using an attribute-based access control model. And this is a special publication by NIST that came out, I think, a couple of years ago. And really the idea is that you're providing an access control method where subject requests to perform operations on objects are granted or denied based on assigned attributes of the subject, assigned attributes of the object, environment conditions, and a set of policies that are specified in terms of those attributes and conditions. The way we like to think about it from a Qlik perspective is attribute-based access control is an access control method where a user requests to perform actions on resources and are granted or denied based on the assigned attributes of the user, assigned attributes of the resource, environment conditions, and a set of security rules that are specified in terms of those attributes and conditions. So when we talk about a user is someone who goes in and logs into Qlik Sense. Actions would be drag and drop capability, the ability to create new sheets, to publish those sheets so that other users can access them, to create stories and share stories with people. In addition, that could also mean from an administrative layer, giving different users or administrators administrative roles in the Qlik management console so that only certain users have the ability to go in and perform things like publish applications to streams or allow edits to content that is already published. So if we take the Qlik definition of attribute-based access control and we dig a little bit deeper from a visual standpoint, you can see in this figure we have our users, our resources, which are our streams, our apps, our stories. We have actions, read, create, publish, and then we have an environment. That could mean it can only be allowed to be done on a desktop or on a mobile device or on a tablet, specific browser versions if you wanted to, or based on attributes that you assign based on how your environment is set up, controls what people can actually do. When you combine those conditions, you either accept or reject the user's ability to effectively perform that set of actions against resources. So the key concept here is to allow the user to do an action on the resource provided a condition. So if we look at this, we've got attribute-based access control where access is granted. In this case, the way we've implemented in Qlik Sense is access is granted, it's not denied. Requests are evaluated against the rules. The policy is independent of the users, and it's scalable, flexible, and it eases management because I can use existing attributes within my user directory, or as you'll see today, use custom properties within Qlik Sense to control access. So I start off with a request where I have a user who's got a name, they've got a user ID, and then they have an attribute of a group, which is equal to sales. And the resource they want to connect to is the quarterly results, and that is a stream. Now, if we look at what the user can do, we basically are saying, okay, if we identify the applicable rules, they're allowed to read on the quarterly results stream, provided that the group is equal to finance. So here we have someone who's part of the sales group trying to access a resource that's only available to the finance group. So what happens is through the evaluation, read access is granted, resource to quarterly results is identified, resource being the stream is identified as well, but there's a disconnect in terms of the group that the user passed to the security rule and what the actual policy is that's been assigned from an attribute based on that group. Therefore, the access is denied. So if you can control what users can see and do, the user attributes basically define roles. They assign actions to allow capabilities, and they set capabilities to resource types like we've talked about, apps, streams, connections, libraries, etc. And you can apply one or more of these conditions to grant access to users. So let's talk about some of the different use cases or roles when it comes to actually building out the access-based or the access-based access control list, the attribute-based access control list. You could have a BI developer who can create applications. Their job is to go ahead and author, but once those apps are authored, they don't really have access to consume that information. They have the ability to do things like read data connectors because they're going to be loading data into QlikSense applications. Now, they build the applications, but then let's say there's a content admin who's actually responsible for reviewing the applications before they're published. So the content admin doesn't have the actual capability to create anything from scratch. They can't read data connectors, so they can't bring data in. But what they can do is they can look at apps that are loaded into memory, and they can determine whether or not those apps are appropriate to publish to streams for the larger audience of users to gain access to. All of this can be controlled through our security rules engine. So the content admin assigns access rights to streams to specific users. Then as users access the streams, which are like folders within QlikSense that could contain one or more applications, users will go in, and we can provide restrictions on data using section access, which provides row-level and column-level security on an application. It also can define the consumer's ability to perform different tasks or different capabilities within a QlikSense app, like we've talked about, editing an app, adding to the content library, adding to the master library of dimensions and measures, being able to create new sheets, publish those sheets, create stories. You can also control things like give people the ability to export data, making it possible for them to only export data on specific applications. If you want to control the data that people can actually take into something like Excel and do further processing or what have you. So then we get into more of a self-service role where maybe you've given some of your power users the ability to, through security rules, to create sheets or stories on different aspects of what you can see, and then you can go ahead and publish those sheets. Now, when you publish a sheet or a story, what's great in QlikSense is that doesn't interfere with the initial approved app that the BI developer built. It only impacts what is created, and there's a governance layer that is basically separating what has been created and approved by the content admin versus what has been published by users into a community that can be shared versus the My Sheets area, which is an area where a user has the ability to create their own content in their own sandbox without having to share it with anybody. When it comes to administration, we can talk about things like central management of security controls or audit capabilities, log management to see what people have access to, as well as we've discussed, granular access control in the administrative interface as well as in the presentation layer. And it's these different roles, these roles, the root admin and the content admin, being built-in roles within QlikSense, but you also have the ability as an administrator or someone who's deploying QlikSense to actually build your own roles that you can assign to different users, can then go ahead and define the type of access, the granular level of access that you want your users to have based on a role. So now we're going to go into some security rules scenarios, and yep, let me flip back. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop. Okay. So what I have open right now is the QlikSense Qlik Management Console, and if I'm at the root of the Management Console, you'll see that I've got my different sections, my Manage Content, Resources, Governance, and Configure System on the left-hand side, and then I have some shortcuts to different items in the middle. I'm actually going to go to Security Rules. And by default, QlikSense comes with a number of security rules and templates already built in. So the nice thing is when you install QlikSense for the first time, you're not in a position where you have to create a whole new set of security rules. There are actually a number of templates and default security rules that are built into QlikSense that enable you to go ahead and start working with the environment. The nice thing is that you can easily enable and disable security rules so that you don't have to remove anything. You can keep those templates, but then you can also create new rules, enable them. So today we're actually going to focus on rules related to the ability to create applications, the ability to modify application objects within a QlikSense application. So I'm going to start off by going into my QlikSense environment as the CEO. And right now, the CEO has the ability, through the My Work, he can go ahead and create an application. And then he can go ahead and open this application, and he can start to load data in, and he has this ability to basically author applications. Well, we know that a CEO probably doesn't need that type of capability or access. So we're going to step out of this for a moment, and we're going to go ahead and go back to, we'll go and, oh, I can't delete that. But what I'll do is I'll go back to the QMC. I'm going to go to the apps. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this test one app, because the CEO shouldn't be creating apps. And then I'm going to go into security rules. And in QlikSense, by default, there's this create app rule. And QlikSense interface for creating rules, there's a couple of different ways that you can actually create rules. One way is through a basic interface that allows you to, almost in a visual query type way, select different parameters that enable you to pick what users can do. So you've got this basic actions of create, read, update, delete, export, publish, change owner, and export data. So these give you overarching capabilities to create apps or read or update, and on and on. There's also an advanced section that allows you to write custom rules. And so there's extensive documentation on our help site that goes through the different types of resources, the different ways to script rules. For this particular example, you can see for Create App, it's pretty basic. We are assigning an app resource filter. And basically we're saying, okay, for any application, what we want to do is allow a user to create an app as long as they're not an anonymous user. So anyone who comes in can go ahead and create an app. And I can go ahead and check and preview this rule, and this will bring up the auditing capabilities of QlikSense. And now I can see on all of the apps that I have currently listed in my environment, all of these users have read access to them. They don't have anything, or they have an other access, which appears to be hidden. So if we go back out to our security rules, we also have this create app modified. And if I go ahead and delete this, or not delete, but disable this create app rule, that's my default rule, and then I go to this create app modified, you're going to see that I've got a slight change here where my resource filter is the same, but now I've got this user at Qlik group is not equal to executive. So basically I'm saying here, okay, any user that's not in the executive group is going to be able to create an app. So basically, if you are part of the executive group, you won't be able to create. You can also see down below here, here's our visual type of editor in the basic section. And you can see I can go ahead and add more rules either using an and or capability as I go through. So I can add different resources to this if I want to. Well, let's just keep it the way that it is, and we're going to go ahead and enable it. So now we're basically saying that the executives are not going to be able to create rules. I'm going to go back to my hub, and you'll notice now the My Work area or the My Work stream is now gone because I've taken that Create App capability away from the executive. If I go into the executive dashboard right now, you can see I have my list of approved sheets. So these were the sheets that were created by my BI developer, and I can go into these sheets and I have the capability to go ahead and interact with them. I can select and make selections and perform any sort of analysis that, and discovery that I want to. But if I want to go ahead and edit this sheet, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to say, well, you don't have permission to edit the sheet because it's one of the approved sheets. If I have the capability, based on security rules, to create my own sheets, I can choose to duplicate the sheet, and then I can go ahead and I can edit the measures and dimensions that are used within this sheet. I can go ahead and change the visualizations if I want, and it will show up. If I go back to my app overview, it will show up in the My Sheets area. But again, the executive, he's really not the kind of guy that has time or the inclination to create sheets, and plus if he does create sheets and he finds something that doesn't look right to him based on some dimensions and measures he picked that don't really make sense, then we could run into a lot of questions the next time we've got a big meeting. And that's the nice thing about these approved sheets is they give us our governed guided experience for the CEO. So we want to turn this My Sheets capability off. I should also point out that I do have some stories attached to this app as well, and if I go into here, I can go ahead and I can walk through this story. And that's great. And again, if I want from a executive perspective, if I go back to the app overview, I can go ahead and create my a new story. Now, that may be something that's good for the CEO to have because stories enable you to take snapshots, and with snapshots, you can go ahead and create new stories, and you can share those stories with people. But first, what we want to do is we want to take away this capability for creating sheets. So we're going to go back to our security rules, and you're going to see I've got a Create App Objects modified rule. That's the rule that I've created. Then we also have this default Create Apps Published App rule. And basically, this is a pretty complex security rule. Essentially, what it's saying is if you're in a stream, so not a stream that's empty, and you have the privilege of read, then and you're not an anonymous user, then you should basically have the access and capability of working with the user state, working with sheets, working with stories, working with bookmarks, creating bookmarks, snapshots, and the like, and give people create capability. Well, again, I've got the executive. I don't want to give him that ability, so I'm going to disable this rule. I'm going to come out, and I'm going to go to Create App Objects Modified, and you'll notice that to a great extent, my rule is identical to that initial Create App Objects Published App rule, except I've added this down at the bottom where I basically said, and user.atClickGroup is not equal to executive. So I want to take a slight detour because I want to talk about the custom properties for a moment, but I am going to enable this before we go out. And then I'm going to go to custom properties. So custom properties within Qlik Sense give you the ability to add attributes that may not exist inside of the user directory that you're using to bring users into Qlik Sense. So Qlik Sense has the ability to connect to Active Directory, LDAPs, databases if you store user information and attribute information about users in a database. You can bring those into Qlik Sense through the user directory connector. When you bring that information in, there are attributes that will automatically populate into the rules editor based on how you've written the user directory connector to behave. In the case of situations where you may not, as a Qlik Sense administrator, you don't have access to update the LDAP or the Active Directory or the data source, but you still want to create properties to define roles and privilege to users, you can create your own attributes using the custom properties. So here I have this Qlik group, and if I go in and I look at Qlik group, you can see that there are a number of different resource types that I can create this custom property against. I can create it against apps. I can create it against nodes. So if I have a multi-node deployment, I can use it for doing things like load balancing. Same thing can be said for proxies in terms of giving people access to specific proxies, and on based on the different resource types that exist within Qlik Sense. In this case, I've built a resource type for users, and what I've done is I've created some values for that. I've got a customer support value, executive, which we saw just a moment ago, finance and operations, human resources, and sales and marketing. And if we go back to the rule, so now I've created this custom property, and now if we go back to the security rules, and we look at my Create App Objects Modified, I can go ahead and use this user.atClickGroup because I've created the resource type of user for this property is not equal to executive. Now I have the ability to control, based on this custom property, what the user is able to do. So let's go back to here. And if we look right now, I just changed the rule. If I go ahead and refresh this page, now you see that the ability to create sheets is gone. So now all the executive can do is walk through approved sheets. All they can do is access what's here, and you'll see that the edit button up in the right-hand corner is gone. They now go into the app, and they can access it, but they can't create anything from it. If I go back to the app overview, and I look at bookmarks, and I look at stories, it also looks like, oh, well, I took away the ability for the CEO to create stories or bookmarks, and that's not exactly what I wanted to be able to do. I wanted to be able to give them the ability to create bookmarks and stories. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go back to my security rules, and I have another rule that I've created, that is Create App Object Exec Streams. Now what this is going to do is if I have a stream named Executive Dashboards and the resource app has privileges of read, I also want to be able to give them access to stories, bookmarks, snapshots, embedded snapshots, and hidden bookmarks that exist on the page. So anything that is related to creating stories or creating bookmarks, I actually want to give the users that access the executive dashboards, in this case the executive, the ability to go ahead and create these things. So I'm going to go ahead and enable this rule that I've created. And now I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page. And now you'll see I can go ahead and create a new story. I can go and I can create a new bookmark if I want. Those options will hide and show based on the security rules that I've created. So I can, at a very granular level, control what different users can do within Qlik Sense. And that's very powerful for governance, and it's very powerful for management, and it's very powerful for experience, because there are certain users that are going to be capable of, power users are capable of being naturally curious and intuitive, and based on the solution that you're deploying, you might want to give them that ability to create their own content. But then there are other users whom you just want to have consume, and so you can create that environment very easily using security rules within Qlik Sense. So I'm going to go back to the presentation at this point and just go through a quick recap. So today we talked about our security rules capability within Qlik Sense based on attribute-based access control and the benefits that an ABAC model brings. It brings a security policy that is independent of users, and as you saw, we created a group that affected a specific user in this case, but enables us to affect change across multiple users. It also accommodates the unanticipated user, so as a new executive comes online, this means that once they're put into an executive group on the back end, or in that attribute comes over into Qlik Sense, they automatically, when they come into Qlik Sense for the first time, will have access to the executive dashboard. There's no additional work that will have to be done inside of Qlik Sense to configure for that new user. So you get compliance, you get access, and you also get ease of administration. You also have the ability to manage role and group creep. So if you have an existing Active Directory, if you have existing attributes in your system that you want to take advantage of within your enterprise, you can bring that into Qlik Sense. You don't have to rebuild it, and you can reduce the risk of having to continue to build more and more to satisfy an ever-changing number of conditions. So at this point, we'll go ahead and start the Q&A. Okay. So let me take a look at the Q&A real quick. Okay, so the first question is, how did I manage to sign in with the same browser session to two roles? The QMC admin and the executive that wasn't able to create apps without re-signing in. So that's a good question. What I'm actually doing, and this is not necessarily related to security rules, but is related to security within Qlik Sense, is under the QMC, I was actually logged in through the central proxy as the Qlik Sense administrator. When we were looking at the hub, I was actually logged in through a virtual proxy called Custom. So in Qlik Sense, you have the ability to actually create what are called virtual proxies that allow you alternative entry points into Qlik Sense using web ticketing, using HTTP headers, and a number of different capabilities. And it gives you a wide breadth of integration possibilities from a security standpoint. And so that's how I was able to manage it in both browsers. So another question. What is the deepest level of rules that can be created for the presentation layer? Well, I think we noticed today that you can create pretty significantly deep capability. You can take away the ability to create sheets. You can take away and grant the ability to create stories. You can also grant or take away the capability to create bookmarks. I suspect that you also have the ability to take away something like the library and create a user whose only ability is to access sheets and interact with them. So they won't have any ability to create. That basically takes the library away. You may want to actually specify in a rule a sheet that you want to make available to other users while essentially making other sheets invisible. You could do that with security rules as well. So a question here is, if you create a custom property for an attribute that is missing in Active Directory, how do you assign users to that custom group? That's a great question. And let me go back to the QMC and share my screen. If I go to Users, I can go ahead and inside of Chris Pratt, who's our CEO that we were working with, there's a custom properties item, and there's a Qlik group, and I can basically assign him to the executive. Now, I can do this manually as I add users, but I can also use the Qlik repository service API if I want to take information and push that change into Qlik Sense as well. So I could, if I stored attributes in a different location than my Active Directory, let's say I stored them in a database, I could actually, through the Qlik repository service API, I could import those into the custom properties of Qlik Sense if I wanted to, and then I can also, through the Qlik repository service API, assign them to specific users. So I am able to automate that capability. So can I insert security rules from a database? I know also I can do it through API. So I think you just kind of talked about that a little bit. And from a database, if you've got your users coming in through a database connection, like an ODBC connection, you'll create actually two tables or views. One will be a user's view, and the other will be an attributes view. That attributes view will basically be a lookup table that you would create that has a list of the users and then the type of attribute. So let's say email address or group membership or some other type of attribute that you might have, and then what the value is for that. So that is one way that you'd be able to go ahead and do that. So one question is, so are AD groups now able to be added as document administrators? And I think that the simple answer is yes, because what you can do is basically create a security rule around a stream and or a specific application, and then you can assign it to a particular group of users. Now, typically, the way that Qlik Sense works is when you publish an application, once it's published, it's pretty much frozen. Those approved sheets are frozen, and they can't be edited. If you give someone the role of content admin, that does change the dynamic of what a user is able to do to an application from a published state. And when the content admin is working with an app in a published state, they can do things like change and update the library. They can also, depending on the granularity that you customize with the content admin role, they could actually create new sheets in the approved section. They could also create new visualizations and the like. That's not the best practice. The best practice would be to unpublish the application and have whoever the author is work with it from a My Sheets perspective, and so that would be an individual owner, but that capability does exist. So one question is, it's possible to limit access a chart or limit the data. So from a Qlik Sense perspective, I don't believe that limiting a chart is available right now. I believe it goes down to the sheet level. But from a data perspective, when you go into an application, you use a concept called section access. Section access performs a row-level reduction of data so that when a user logs in, there's an initial reduction or selection that's made on the data, and it's made based on the data model, and it only shows you the data that you have access to. Okay, so a question just came in. Today, when creating an ODBC user directory connector, the only attributes available are group and email. Has this been increased to support multiple unlimited attributes? I actually, not on this Qlik Sense server, but on another Qlik Sense server of mine, I actually have some custom attributes. They are called access and something else. And if you give me one moment. Okay. Okay. I can't seem to find it. But you can create unlimited attributes with Qlik Sense. There's using the ODBC connection. If you just test with CSV files, you'd be able to see that you'd be able to go ahead and create any type of attribute that you want to. What you want to make sure of is that you create it properly. So I found the file, and I'll share my screen again. And so in this case, I do have an ID field. That's not a required field, but the user ID field is required. Then I have this field called type, and then the value, like I was speaking about earlier. I have an email type, and there are my emails. But then I also have this access type, where I've got the CEO, and he's a member of execs. And I've got different access based on different users. So you can create different types and use those within Qlik Sense. And what will happen is when you have an appropriately set up ODBC connection, when you go into the QMC and you look at users and you click on the I here, you'll see the list of different attributes that are assigned to that specific user. The user directory connector pulls that in and then shows that information here. Okay, I do see a couple more questions, but we're going to wrap up at this point. We'll definitely follow up on those questions at a later date. A number of them are questions about SSO as well as section access, and we can respond privately about those and send you some documentation and information related to that. So Colleen, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. This concludes today's webinar. As I mentioned earlier, I will be sending all participants a link to the on-demand version, so be expecting that either by end of day or on Monday. Up on the screen now, you'll see a bunch of different resources where you can find more information, including white papers, case studies, demos, and free downloads of both QlikView and Qlik Sense. Thank you again for joining, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.